So we're going to talk about Parashat Vayigash tonight. Parashat Vayigash is very emotional. Every time we read it, when Yosef finally reveals his identity to his brothers, Ani Yosef, I'm your brother that you sold me to Egypt, remember? It's a big shock to the brothers who were not expecting it. They were definitely confused with the identity of this individual. They didn't know what to suspect. They thought he was a little bit different. He was strange. His behavior didn't make sense to them. But all of a sudden, they now realize, they now have all the answers to their questions and their doubts cleared up. Oh, no wonder. Now it makes sense. But initially, they're taken by surprise. They're very, very shocked. But besides the shock, it's very emotional. Everybody begins, of course, to cry, to embrace. Very, very emotional moment. And in order to properly understand what happened here, it's important to look at a major problem that we have that unfortunately people don't realize is taking a big toll on relationships. When we properly understand what the problem is, we will realize that what the Torah describes here is exactly what is happening everywhere else in the world throughout our history. And that concerns relationships that were once upon a time perhaps solid, good and healthy, break up. And it is the most painful thing that you can ever experience, even more painful than the death of a relative that was very dear to you. That is a love, a friendship that was solid, it was good, everything was smooth, and somehow, at some point, it breaks up. Very, very painful. Especially if it's not mutual, where one still wants to have that relationship and the other one does not. That even makes it even more difficult. So this can happen to friendships, this can happen to all kinds of other relationships, partnerships, marriages, and unfortunately, even brothers and sisters, which makes it even more painful, because we're talking about blood relatives. Supposedly blood relatives. You can't get any closer than that, but you'd be surprised. Shlomo HaMelech says in Mishlei, Yesh re'a davuk me'ach. There are some friends, some friendships that are closer than brothers and sisters. So just because brothers and sisters share the same parents, it's not a guarantee that they will necessarily have the best relationship. But it does occur that people who are totally unrelated have a chemistry between them, have a very strong bond between them, as long as there's loyalty, of course. Not everyone is loyal. But if there is loyalty, and the chemistry is there, and the two of them are compatible, which of course helps with misunderstandings. The more compatible people are, the more they know each other, the less room for misunderstandings, which can also cause problems. So you do have that from time to time, that friends are good friends for a long time, closer than brothers and sisters, but even that can sometimes break up. And when it does, it can be very, very painful. So we need to understand exactly why this happens, and this will help us sort out a little bit what happened with Yosef and his brothers. It should not have happened. We're talking about, after all, righteous people, not bad people. Obviously, people make mistakes. Mistakes do happen. When people make mistakes, sometimes they regret it later on. Sometimes they don't even realize they made a mistake. But it can be very, very damaging to a relationship. Mistakes that happen. One of the more infamous, I call it infamous, mistakes is when a woman betrays the trust of her husband, sotah in the Torah. They had a good relationship. They were soulmates even. They started off fine. But she committed a terrible mistake in betraying that trust, in going off with someone else. She succumbed to some temptation. The guy somehow tempted her, lured her. Somehow it happened. This happens all the time, unfortunately. So you have many examples of where solid relationships, where everything was okay in the very beginning, can go sour. Sometimes, however, it happens as a result of inheritance. Brothers and sisters, you hear it all the time, fighting about the inheritance. Money. Money is something so powerful that sometimes people just are willing to do anything to get their hands on it, even to kill, so they can get their hands on that money. They worship it, even at the cost of breaking up with a brother and sister. And many times these brothers and sisters who have been fighting about an inheritance don't see each other for 20, 30 years. They don't go to each other's semachot, weddings and bar mitzvah. They don't talk to each other. Why? Because of the money. Incredible. Relatives, they were fine up until when it came to money. Once it comes to money, people go crazy. And that's, of course, a whole different topic. It has more to do with materialistic outlook that people have. Because of the materialistic outlook, people succumb to all kinds of temptations. They're weak. They cannot manage properly. They cannot handle the problem properly if their outlook is very materialistic. Sometimes it happens that as a result of a brother-in-law or a sister-in-law, things go wrong. In other words, the brothers and sisters are fine, but who did they marry? As a result of who they marry, sometimes that causes the problems. You see? They were okay. The brothers and sisters were fine, but because of who they married, that soured their relationship. So it could happen because of all kinds of reasons. And unfortunately, many, many times when we're dealing with a marriage, it ends up in divorce. So a lot of divorces today come about as a result of all kinds of issues that are family related, money related, and the like. So here we have the brothers of Yosef finally meeting at a time when they thought perhaps he's gone, even though they weren't searching for him. They didn't know, they had no clue where he was. But they did make a commitment. They did make a commitment, as since they're going to Egypt anyway, they're going to go look for him. So somewhat they felt bad, otherwise why should they be looking for him? And why do they feel bad? Because their father is still mourning. Yaakov is still mourning for 22 years. So somewhat they feel bad, but they're not completely remorseful yet. Even though previously, in Parashat Miketz, we did discuss the fact that they understood that perhaps from Shammai, from heaven, there's an accusation against them. Otherwise, why are all these things happening to them? Why is the ruler of Egypt giving them such a hard time? So they did pick up on some of the signs, but they're not completely remorseful yet. When do they finally regret what they did? When do they finally realize that what they did to Yosef was wrong? Only when they meet up with him. Then everything begins to make sense. His dreams came true. Remember, they made fun of him first. So only then, little by little, it sinks in, and they realize how terrible of a mistake they made. But before we get to this mistake, before we get to their reaction, we need to understand a little bit why there are such arguments amongst brothers and sisters, and what's the solution? How can we prevent this? Ultimately, this is the lesson that we need to learn. How to prevent this from happening, because it repeats itself time after time in many families. So what's the solution? There's no doubt that a great deal has to do with what the parents transmit to the children. What they teach, what is important for them. If parents talk about money all the time, then money is going to be important to the children too. If that's all they care about, if that's all they emphasize, if that's what they pursue, then obviously that's the lesson they're teaching. So it all will begin with what the parents value, what's important to them and what they teach. Very important for a parent not to show favoritism to one child more than another. That is part of the problem here, where Yaakov did show favoritism to Yosef, more than to the rest of them, even though he loved them too, but he showed favoritism. We're only human beings. And when we detect that, we get upset. Why showing favoritism towards him more than anybody else? So this is obvious. These are commentaries talk about that this is something obvious. The rabbis tell us, be very careful not to do that. Another important idea that the rabbis also stressed is for one to prepare a will, a tzava'ah, very clearly pointing out who gets what. Because if the will is not clear, or if there's no will altogether, you're going to have a lot of fights It's going to end up going to court. A lot of money is going to be spent on attorneys, and they may end up with most of the money. In order to avoid that, be smart and prepare a will, a proper will, specifying what needs to be made clear so that there should be no misunderstandings later on. All of this, however, is not enough. Even though everything was done right, I've heard of cases where the will was perfect and they still had arguments. No, he didn't mean that. No, he was coerced. It's a fake signature. It was forged. All kinds of things. What does this teach you? That the root of the problem is not because the parents necessarily didn't do something 100% right. It begins with midot. It begins with character. Some people have a real bad nature that they never work on. They never refine. And of course, we said before, it could also possibly be that the person is okay. He's a nice gentleman, but he marries someone who's not. He marries a woman who's jealous of her sister-in-laws. Why does your brother or your sister-in-law have this and we don't have? You know what this does to partnerships? When the wife of one partner starts comparing, how come your partner has more than you? How come he's driving a better car than you? Again, we're back to materialism. So it could be that the person, the brother, is a fine person, but who he marries causes a lot of trouble. But let's leave that alone for now. Going back to the nature, going back to the midot, which is a big area in itself, character refinement that people struggle with. Either they struggle with because they're really trying their best to refine some characteristic flaw, or they struggle with it, meaning that they're having a lot of trouble in life, not knowing that they can correct some of those flaws if they really confronted them. So some people are aware of those flaws and do something about it, and they struggle in attempting to refine them, which is at least good. At least they try. They go to classes and they learn how to deal with those problems. And there are others that struggle, meaning that they're going to have a hard time building relationships, whether it's friendships or marriages, because they're struggling with a flaw that they don't know how to correct. They don't even know if it exists. They don't even admit it sometimes. So some of those flaws are as follows. I think that the biggest flaw, one of the most serious flaws, is selfishness. Not everybody is selfish. You actually have people, believe it or not, that are unselfish. It's hard to believe, no? People we think of as selfish. People think of themselves, but there are people who by nature, they don't have that problem. They're unselfish. They're willing to do for others. They care about others. They're sensitive about others. It's beautiful. They have to be careful too. People shouldn't take advantage of them. They have other weaknesses perhaps. But at least they're unselfish. That's so beautiful. So one who is selfish is going to have a hard time in life. He's always thinking of himself, and people will realize that. People will detect that. You can't hide selfishness. It becomes apparent in many, many ways. When a person thinks of himself, he's focused on himself, he only cares about himself. You can't hide it so easily. So this, of course, is a big problem. If a person does not control that selfishness, if he's not willing to share, he's not willing to be considerate of others, then how is he going to get along with anybody? He's always going to be fighting with people, whether it's a co-worker, nothing really that has to do with him. In other words, he's not related to him. He's a co-worker, that's all. Still, if he's selfish, somehow they're going to have a fight, perhaps in the lunchroom. You think he's going to be able to stand on a long line? He's going to try to, get to the front, and people are going to be upset at him. He's selfish, so he's going to run into a lot of trouble. Another area that presents trouble, which is very common, even a bigger problem sometimes than selfishness, is jealousy. Kohelet, Solomon, who wrote the book of Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, basically says as follows. The bottom line is that a lot of trouble stems from kin'ah. Ki hakol kin'at ish mer'ehu. Just about everything stems from, is as a result of jealousy. Sometimes that jealousy is good because people are jealous, they want to be like someone who's good, they want to emulate him. That's good. That's a good jealousy. Be envious of those who have good qualities so you could hopefully adapt them to yourself. But most envy, most jealousy is not good. It's negative. And that requires a lot of work to get it under control. It's very, very difficult to control unless one has the proper hashkafa, the proper outlook. What's coming to me, I'm going to get anyway. Nobody can take away a penny from what's coming to me. What he has, let him enjoy it. To have that kind of an attitude, that kind of an outlook requires learning. It's not normal. It's not natural. It requires one to learn. And if one does not learn that, one does not have that kind of an outlook, then he's going to have a problem with jealousy. Now, it could be that beyond the jealousy, nothing will happen. He'll just be jealous. He'll be bitter. He'll be unhappy. But he won't hurt the other person. But it could be some of these character flaws will become more and more serious. If a person is jealous, he might do something. It could lead to hatred. And hatred, as you know, can lead to physical harm. So it all depends. But sometimes the person who's jealous just remains jealous. You can't help it. He's just jealous. Unless, of course, he learns. Then you have the problem that we mentioned earlier, the emphasis on money. It's not so much about selfishness, it's not so much about jealousy, but it's about priorities in life. If money is a priority, if it's something that is worshipped, it's going to lead people to all kinds of problems. A lot of people end up spending that which they cannot afford, living on a higher standard than they should be, according to their means. People have to more or less know, I can afford this or I cannot afford this. Not everybody knows how to manage finances properly. But it's not just about management, it's also about priorities. When they see nice things, they think they can buy it. And who's to blame? Part of the blame goes to credit cards. It sounds funny, but there's some truth to it. Because of the credit card, people feel, listen, I don't have the cash, I don't have the money now, but I'm buying it on credit. Maybe 30 days later I will. Perhaps a good rule to follow will be, if you cannot pay for it now, then don't buy it on credit. You can't afford it now. There are exceptions, of course. Sometimes you can't pay for something that there's a need for right away, so you buy it on credit. But a lot of times people get used to this idea of borrow now and pay later. Enjoy life now, pay for it later. And sometimes they can't pay. They go bankrupt and they lose their home. And sometimes they even lose their marriage because of that. The wife or the husband, either one, overspent. The two should know and should share information on how much they can afford. The woman has no idea how much her husband earns. What are his true abilities? She might overdo it and she might upset him. Yeah, it happens all the time. She has no clue. You have to sit down and talk about these things. If she comes from a home where they splurged and bought anything expensive, and she marries someone who's more economical and more conservative perhaps, it's going to lead to trouble. You can't afford to keep up with her lifestyle. So money problems present definitely serious problems in life, and it can be very, very damaging to any relationship. You have people who are not necessarily selfish. They're not necessarily jealous either, but they're bitter. That's their nature. They're bitter people. They're very unhappy. Now, obviously, these people could be suffering from all kinds of things. It could be that they're in an unhappy marriage, and that is why they're bitter. That is something that can be dealt with somewhat, because it's a certain problem that is causing their bitterness. So I'm more talking about a general bitterness. They're always bitter. They're always unhappy. There's even a name for an individual like that, and it's called in Hebrew nirgan. Now, if you ask even an Israeli who knows perfect Hebrew, he will not understand perfectly what is the word nirgan. Because nirgan or nirganut is a very unique word that Shlomo HaMelech uses in Mishlei Proverbs to describe an individual who's always complaining and ungrateful. So if you want to know what nirgan is, it's a combination of ungratefulness and always complaining. Or as we would call him in Yiddish, a kvetcher. He's always kvetching. He's always nagging. He's always unhappy. And he's ungrateful. What that means is that even if you do everything he asked for, he's still not happy. You can never make this person happy. And if you look at what Shlomo Melech says in Mishlei, you see pretty much between the lines that this is an individual who's basically, you can't help him. I don't want to use the word lost case on anyone. I'm just saying someone that you cannot help. Just forget about him. No matter what you say or what you do, you will never make him happy. So obviously there are people like that, people who have all kinds of problems. And we're not going to take apart all these problems, because the main point that I want to stress over here is that because of character flaws, you have all kinds of consequences. Consequences that can result in damaging even the best relationships. Character flaws. People who are bitter, jealous, selfish, or because there's a great emphasis on money, which is not necessarily a character flaw, but it has to do with the wrong hashkafa, the wrong outlook, the wrong priorities. Being very materialistic, which is also a problem. And of course, it doesn't help that people don't learn Torah. How are they going to know that they're making a mistake? They think that this is the way of life. This is the American dream, that you should have a big house and a dog, of course. It's the American dream. But maybe the American dream was not meant for you. Maybe it's not meant for you, depending on your mazal. If you don't have the mazal and you can't afford it, you don't want to go into debt and then be stressed and get a heart attack, God forbid, because of all that stress. What for? Be very, very careful not to overdo it when it comes to money, because a lot of people have made terrible blunders in life as a result of going beyond their means. And they lost their home. And it didn't have to happen that way. Obviously, a lot of these issues that exist between people who were once upon a time very, very close are not resolved. They don't resolve it. They don't know how to resolve it. And they end up going to court. Or there's, God forbid, sometimes a physical attack as a result of them trying to solve their problems with aggression. If these kind of situations are not resolved peacefully and properly, it could lead to all kinds of consequences that are unpredictable. But what hurts the most, it's not so much the physical aggression, because sometimes people can become physical and then regret it. It was at the heat of the moment, they couldn't control themselves. The worst part of this, and this is really the emphasis of the Parasha, is when they break up. Because when people break up, to get them back together is very difficult. Especially if the breakup occurred after a lot of fighting, a lot of bad feelings that they held inside, and they did not communicate. How are you going to restore the peace? How are you going to bring back the trust? There was once upon a time trust. Trust that is lost, how are you going to bring it back? People are not going to be so trusting so quickly. So yes, there are very, very terrible consequences as a result of relationships that did not get the proper guidance in how to deal with the problems. There are all kinds of consequences. But let's not forget that if people learn the proper hashkafot, if they have the proper outlook, they will be able to deal with the problems better. Let me give you just a quick example. What do I mean by proper outlook? People realize that there's a problem. They have a difference of opinion. There's a major issue. But they recall having learned that to pursue peace is something very noble. Derachea darchenom, the ways of the Torah are pleasant. You have to be ohev shalom, you have to love peace, make peace. They remember that. It's important to them. They've seen others do that. Okay, that's great, because now they have something to hold on to. Wait a minute, I'm not going to fight with him. I'd rather lose money. rather lose money than have to fight, than have to go to court. Isn't it better to just make peace? Isn't that something much more important than all the money in the world? Unfortunately, not to many people. Money is more important. Could you believe that? And we're not talking about $1 million. Sometimes it's even $1,000. For $1,000, you're willing to break up a relationship? Is it worth it? How could people, for $1,000, break up a relationship? So obviously it's not just the money, it's the arguments. It's that they can't deal with that person anymore. They fought so much about it. They fought about $10. It's incredible. We're not talking about stinginess here. Stinginess is a whole different problem. We're talking about people who value money more than they value shalom bayit, peace and harmony. And it's a shame. So what are we going to do about it? Well, you can't just tell people, go ahead and learn proper outlook. Sit down and learn how to deal with problems in life. As I said earlier, it really begins in one's home. It's the example that the parents set. Number one. That's number one. If we have to go according to a certain order, that's the order. You want to give the child a fair chance in dealing with problems properly. A fair chance, because if there's no fair chance, then you're basically leaving him to his own raw nature. And if it happens to be that this young man or young woman have a raw nature of being selfish, then how are they going to deal with these kinds of problems? On their own? You expect them on their own to be successful? I'm going to control myself. I'm selfish and I'm not going to be selfish. I'm jealous by nature, but I'm not going to be jealous this time. Who's going to do that? So if the parents set the tone, then there's something that you can depend on, something that you can fall back on, something that will remind you, but wait a minute, my parents were not like that. They didn't make a big deal out of this. They didn't care about these things. It helps. It's not a guarantee, but it helps. 100%, no doubt about it, that it's important to learn. Because what does learning do? Learning reminds us of things that we may know already. Learning directs us. People are biased. And if they don't have something to go by, they're going to think they're right. So learning accomplishes a lot. No one can ever say, I know it all. No one can ever say, I don't make mistakes. No one can ever say, I'm perfect. So the learning acts like a mirror. Oh no, this is describing me. So you're getting criticism for free. And you don't mind getting this kind of criticism because it's not a friend or a parent telling you, it's the book. So you don't mind this much. Learning accomplishes a lot. So what should we emphasize? What can we help? What can we do to help people that have character flaws, have trouble in their relationships, or simply are about to get into a lot of trouble as a result of their selfishness? What can we do? One of the most important midot, one of the most important characteristics that has to be taught early on that will help avoid a lot of strife, a lot of trouble, and help people more or less handle all kinds of problems in any kind of relationship is midat chesed. The characteristic of benevolence, of kindness. Early on, kids have to learn the importance of tzedakah, charity, sensitivity to the poor man, being very, very careful not to put him down. Oh, look how he's dressed. Oh, he smells. Yeah. I'm not talking about children, so even adults talk like that sometimes. Wait a minute. Maybe he doesn't have a shower. Maybe he's a homeless person. Maybe he's so pained by his situation that he hasn't had a time to take a shower. He can't afford a new suit. You need to give people the benefit of the doubt. But before we even give people the benefit of the doubt, you have to develop sensitivity. Don't you realize that Hashem created all of us, the poor and the rich, the smart and the not so smart? They're all created by the same Hashem. Why he did so, we don't know. That's none of our business. We have to be very careful how we judge people, how we treat people. And this all starts with chesed. One of the most important characteristics that is emphasized and taught in Judaism. And who's the father and the pillar of Chesed? Avraham Avinu. So it's not just by chance that Abraham, the first one, is the one that represents this midah. Because without it, you can't build a world. Olam Chesed Imareh. And when we say you can't build a world, we mean you can't build a relationship. It's the same idea. Every home is like a world. Every family is a world. You need Chesed. Chesed will help with selfishness. You're not going to be so selfish if you're going to be doing Chesed. You're going to be kind, you're going to be charitable. But what is Chesed exactly? Some people think Chesed is when you're nice to someone. Can I help you with anything you need? Is that Chesed? It's very nice, but that's not Chesed. You want to know what real Chesed is? Listen to the following story. There was a woman, unfortunately, who became a young widow. Her husband passed away, and she has children to raise. It was very, very sad. A big tragedy. She lived in a Jewish community, a good community, thank God. And as soon as people heard about it, some people went over to her, is there anything I can do for you? Well, it's so nice of you that they went over. But you know who really did Chesed? Those that didn't ask, can I do anything for you? They went on their own and helped her with the cooking without even asking her. They fixed her car that needed to be fixed. They took care of her taxes and accounting that needed to be taken care of. They took their kids to school because they realized she may not be able to. They didn't first ask, is there anything I can do for you? That's so easy to do, to ask. No, if you really care about Chesed, you don't ask. If you know what needs to be done, you just go ahead and do it. That's Chesed. People went out of their way to shop for her when they shopped for themselves. They bought extra. That's Chesed. A lot of people just ask, but they don't end up doing anything. Why not? Because that person may be actually embarrassed to say, oh, I need this, or maybe they don't want to ask a favor. Chesed, amiti, true Chesed, you don't really ask. If you are aware, I'm assuming that you're aware of what needs to be done, you take care of it right away. So when Yosef finally reveals himself to the brothers, what does he do? Chesed. He gives them gifts. He could have held a grudge. He could have been resentful. He could have taken revenge even. No, not Yosef. Yosef is a tzaddik. Yosef controlled himself. In many areas, he controlled himself, where he had challenges. And this too. So very, very, very challenging. If this is the way he was treated, he was sold as a slave, can you imagine? He was ridiculed. They almost killed him. They hated him. And here, it says, I'm ignoring everything that happened in the past. I'm not paying attention to that. Even though he on his own does admit later on that he sees that it was all orchestrated from above. It's all a tovah, it's all for the good anyway. Don't worry, you didn't do it. It's not your fault you sold me to Egypt. Hashem made it happen. Hashem wanted me to be here in this position. He makes them feel good, but that's the truth. He's not just making up a story. He's not just trying to make them feel good. He realizes this on his own too. Apparently, you know what, it's not your fault. Even though they did the wrong thing. Yosef didn't have to come down to Egypt, the rabbis tell us, by being sold through his brothers. He could have come down in some other way. Unfortunately, they had something against him, and it had to happen through them. And we're still paying the price for this baseless hatred till today. As some of the rabbis said, according to the Kabbalah, that a lot of the blood libels the Jewish people have suffered throughout history, blood libels that don't make any sense. Since when do we use blood to bake matzah? Right? The infamous blood libels? Ridiculous accusations. But those blood libels have something to do with the accusation against us for having dipped Yosef's garment in the blood of a goat. You recall that? So there's an accusation still pending out there. As long as there's that baseless hatred, it resurfaces. That accusation resurfaces. That this is what the brothers did to Yosef. So anyway, one has to be very sensitive to another individual, regardless of his religion and background. He's a human being. But now let's talk a little bit about the brothers themselves. What was their reaction? The brothers of Yosef finally realized, wow, this is Yosef. Look, we didn't recognize him because of the beard. We haven't seen him for a long time, even though he recognized them. So the initial shock is because they're completely taken by surprise. But the rabbis tell us, you know why they were really shocked? It's not just that they were surprised by the way he looked. They were shocked because of his kedusha, his holiness. For him to rise to this high position, for him to be where he is, he must have not contaminated himself in Egyptian society. He must have preserved his real values that he was taught at home. He must be a tzaddik. Otherwise Hashem would not have allowed him to rise to power. And they confirmed it, of course, with him. They asked him, how did you do it? What did you do? How did you get there? Why you? Why not some other brother? Why Yosef? Now we know Hashem has his plans and Hashem knows which neshama, which soul. But without getting into that, you have to be a good person to deserve this. You must have done something right. They said, what did you do? He says, yes, I preserved my holiness, and it was very difficult. In Egypt, of all places, to be a tzaddik, I succeeded. So they were shocked because of his kedusha. That was heroic. That was incredible. But here comes the bigger shock. Of course, they didn't know that he was such a great man. Okay, now they know. The biggest and most painful shock was, wow, we made such a big mistake. Now they realize it more than ever. Now it pains them. We sold him for what? Because he was telling us about his dreams, because of Yaakov, their father's favoritism. This is childish. We should have been a little bit more mature and more responsible. We should have realized that this is wrong. So that is the biggest shock of all. The shock of realizing they made a big mistake. Baruch Hashem, there's something called teshuvah. When we make a mistake in our relationship with Hashem, Hashem says, it's okay. You're only human. At the very least, do teshuvah, say I'm sorry. At the very least, when you make a mistake, say I'm sorry, and you haven't repaired your mistake yet, but at least you took the first step. And that is the first step of teshuvah. The first steps of teshuvah, repentance, is charata, vidui, v'kabbalah le'atid. Three things. Charata means regret. Vidui means you verbally confess. And kabbalah le'atid means you make a commitment. I'm not going to do this again. Or I am going to do something that I should have been doing, depending if we're talking about positive or negative. So this, the brothers see and immediately realize, look, Yosef reached this position by virtue of his righteousness, his holiness. And where are we? What did we do? We made this terrible mistake. Look how we acted. You know, there are times when people meet, and the only reason they met, the benefit of that meeting or that relationship is called karma. That's what is, some people call it, a karmic relationship. What does that produce? It produces that one of the characteristic flaws of one of the individuals comes out. In other words, in that relationship, one brings out the worst in the other person. As a result of their meeting, as a result of their relationship, one brings out the worst in the other, which means that the other person is able to see that flaw, that weakness that they have. This individual coming into their life draws it out, brings it out. Oh, I didn't realize how selfish I was. I see this through your unselfishness, through your goodness, through your behavior. I see how terrible I am, or how weak I am. So you see, this is what happened more or less with Yosef and the brothers. They saw how good he is, and that brought out how bad they were or how wrong they were. So sometimes you have this kind of relationships or kinds of meetings that people meet, two people meet, where one brings out the worst of the other one. But it's a learning experience. It's not just by chance that they met. It's something that we can learn from. But Yosef, what else does he do? He makes sure not to embarrass his brothers. They're in shock. They're embarrassed. They feel bad. He could have made it worse, Yosef. Imagine if the Egyptians in the room heard, "What? What did you say? I'm Yosef, the one you sold?" What does Yosef do? "Please leave." He asked all the Egyptians to leave the room, so that the brothers should not be embarrassed. You see his sensitivity? You see it in many areas where Yosef did show sensitivity, did cry, did feel bad about the whole experience. Sure. What else does he do? He tells them, when you go home and tell our father that I'm alive, don't fight, don't be sad, because everything was for the good. Why does he talk about sadness? It's quite normal for people to be sad, disappointed, feel terrible about what they did. But the rabbis warned us against it. Be very careful with the midah of sadness. You may have done something wrong, but don't be too sad about it, because sadness will be a problem, will pose a problem with progress. Here you want to correct something, here you want to advance, you want to improve. Be careful not to be too sad. Sadness can lead to depression, and instead of enabling someone to overcome the problem and deal with it properly and leave it behind, it will still be there. You want to let go of it. You want to leave it behind and start a new chapter in your life. You want to start from scratch the relationship. You want to rebuild it. Don't be sad. Be very, very careful. You of course should regret what you did. That's very, very important, but not sad. How do you change course? How do you go about improving the relationship? You say, I'm sorry, and you do teshuvah. Now, what does the teshuvah exactly do? What does the repentance really do? How does it help us? Whether it's teshuvah with Hashem, or whether it's teshuvah with another human being. We want to make amends, right? We want to make peace. We want to restore the relationship. What does it exactly do, the teshuvah? On a Kabbalistic level, teshuvah enables us to sever the ties, to completely sever the ties with the past. Because when a sin is committed, we have given some rights, some control to the sitra achara, to the impure forces. It's like they've taken over here. It's like they have a hold over us. We're somewhat their prisoner. We want to get away from them. We want to get away from that problem that we got ourselves into. So by only saying I'm sorry, it may not be enough. Because a person who says I'm sorry may do it over again the next day. He has to sever ties. He has to completely distance himself from it. So real teshuvah, where one feels remorseful, confesses, makes a commitment, all of those three things helps him sever the ties, remove the shackles. He's now no longer being tied down. And that's why teshuvah is so important, real teshuvah. So saying I'm sorry is very nice, but it's not enough, especially if it's a serious offense. And you want to restore the peace, you want the relationship to really be healthy again, you have to do real teshuvah. Imagine husband and wife who've been fighting for 25 years. Not 1 year, 25. And they finally break up, or they're about to break up. What are the chances of making peace there? Very difficult. They can go to all the marriage counselors they want. What has happened over 25 years is that they've lost feelings for each other. They no longer have those feelings that existed in the first year of marriage. So if all those good feelings have been lost, how are you going to introduce it back? How are you going to make them want each other? They're not interested anymore. They've lost feeling. So the marriage counselor cannot help them. A marriage counselor can sometimes guide them in the very, very beginning. Listen, you're making a mistake. This is the way you should handle this. But 25 years, you wait now to go to a counselor. No matter what they do, it may be difficult because neither of the two will want to stay together. Usually they're tired of each other. Is there any chance whatsoever? The answer is yes. I always talk about it. There's still a chance. People can make a U-turn. If the two of them, not one, if the two of them come to the conclusion, honey, you know what? We've been doing it wrong all along. We've made terrible mistakes. Wow, I just learned something from this book. Come and see what it says. Wow. So they're not divorced yet. They said, you know what? Let's adopt this lifestyle now. Let's adopt this outlook. Let's make sure that the Shabbat is really beautiful. Let's do teshuvah. Then it's possible. And there are many stories like that. It's very difficult because of feelings. Feelings have been lost, they've been hurt. But is it impossible? No, it's not impossible if there's proper teshuvah. Because that's what teshuvah does. It has tremendous power. If Hashem says, I'll take you back, then why shouldn't the husband take back his wife or a wife take back her husband? He's really about teshuvah. He's for real. He's not going to be the way he was in the past. He won't be as abusive anymore. He won't do whatever he did that was wrong. He's really going to detach himself, sever ties completely with his old ways. No more alcohol, if that was his problem. No more drugs, if that was it. For real. He severed the ties with those troublemakers, then it's possible. But for people to change completely, if it's nature, it's difficult. But usually part of the difficulty is because they don't want it. They're not interested in changing. Why should I? They don't want to work hard. But it's possible if people realize, wow, I did not have the proper outlook, I made a terrible mistake. And that's what happens here between Yosef and the brothers. They all realized that there was a terrible mistake. But more so the brothers who are in shock that they misjudged here. That Yosef is really a tzaddik. When does Yosef reveal himself? What happens that triggers Yosef to decide, now it's time to reveal myself? When something very important happens. And that particular detail is the most critical detail to be able to achieve proper teshuvah. And that detail is called hachna'ah, being submissive. Being submissive, realizing that Hashem is the boss, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to do teshuvah. Submissiveness is very difficult for most people, because submissive means I'm willing to listen to criticism, I'm willing to accept the fact that I was wrong. Not everybody is submissive so easily. So, how does Yosef know it's time to reveal himself? Because he has noticed submissiveness on Yehuda's part. When Yehuda says to Yosef, listen, I'm willing to take Binyamin's place. I'm willing to be your slave here. And let him go back home. Yosef says, that's it. I've heard real teshuvah. I've seen it for real. And he means it. Yehuda is not faking it. He's willing to be in prison instead of Yosef, instead of Binyamin. Oh, v'lo yachal Yosef litapek. As soon as he heard those words, as soon as he heard everything that Yehuda had to say, he was very, very touched, and he realized this is real teshuvah. It is not a coincidence that we have the fast of Tevet, Asara B'Tevet, coming up now. It also has something to do with what we're talking about. Here we're talking about the importance of submissiveness. What happened in Asara B'Tevet? Several things happened for which we fast, but one of them was that they laid a siege against Yerushalayim. Now, what is a siege? A siege is something that the enemy does to attempt to have the other side submit to them without a fight. Let's avoid a war. Let's make life difficult for you. We'll put a siege against your fortified walls, and we're not going to break in. We're not going to do anything. We're going to wait for you to be hungry and to submit and to give in. So that's what the siege is for. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God also wants us to be humble and to submit. And sometimes He sends us signals that are intended to make us be a little bit more submissive, to change our ways. But sometimes people don't get the signals, don't get the message. So Hashem has to make them submissive. Hashem has to bring them down, either through a financial loss or through some other problem that occurs in their life, which humbles them and makes them finally realize that they were wrong all along. If they on their own do not do it, despite all the messages that they get, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu sometimes has to use a hard hand with force to bring them to submission. So that's what is symbolized with the wall in Asara B'Tevet. Why is there a wall? Why is there mention of a wall? Why is there a siege over here? I'm not talking about just militarily. The enemy wants to lay siege because they want to defeat them. I'm not talking about, there's some symbolism here. What does this all mean? We must remember that in order for one to be completely submissive, he has to first realize the seriousness of his offense. He has to know what he has done wrong. And a lot of times this never happened. They didn't pay attention to what they were doing wrong. And they had to be told through prophets or through some other way that there's something seriously wrong. They didn't get the message. So here HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought an enemy, a powerful enemy, to lay siege so that they should hopefully get the message. The last opportunity, before they break through, before they destroy your home, you're getting here a powerful message. And what is that? What's that message here? You see this wall? This wall that you have to protect yourself? You know what? This wall can be penetrated by the enemy. Give them time, and they'll penetrate it. This is not so important, this wall. You know what you need to learn from this? You need to learn from this that there is walls that you have erected. You have erected other walls between you and him. You have erected another wall, a barrier between you and him. You have erected walls between you and your neighbor. You've erected walls between you and your brother. These are the walls that should not be erected. These are the walls that should be broken down. These are the walls that should not exist. And that is why your big wall, your fortified wall, is about to be broken. Because that's what you need to do on your own, to break down those walls that do not need to exist between you and Hashem and between you and your brethren. Just like to finish with a story that pretty much brings this point out very, very nicely. It's a famous parable. There were two brothers who grew up and had a wonderful relationship. They were like twins. They shared everything. They got along so beautifully. They had a beautiful relationship from when they were very young. And even when they got married into their adult years, they lived next to each other. They had a farm. They worked together. They shared their tools together. Everything was beautiful. Everyone who saw them thought, wow, what a beautiful relationship they have. But one day they had a very, very nasty argument. And they pretty much drifted and no longer spoke to each other. Became very, very distant. But especially one of the brothers was very, very upset because he always felt it's his other brother's fault and never forgave him for that. So they didn't see each other, they didn't talk to each other. One day a carpenter comes looking for work. And he knocks on this door of the brother who was very, very upset. You have any work for me to do? I'm looking for work. He says, yes. I just realized I have something very important I'd like you to take care of. You see that house across the creek? I don't want to see it anymore. My brother lives there, and I don't want to see his face. I want you to build me a big wall, 20 feet high, not 8, 20 feet. I don't want to see him anymore. Could you do this for me? He says, yes. I'm going to need a couple hours, but I can do it for you. Yeah. That's fine, because I'm going now to town. And hopefully by the time I come home this evening, it will be ready. He says, yes, fine. So the brother went to town, and this man got to work. But instead of building a wall, he built a beautiful bridge across the creek from this brother's house to the other brother's house. A beautiful bridge. And sure enough, as soon as the brother comes home, he sees that the other brother is crossing the bridge. And he goes over to him, and that brother who lived across says, how nice of you. What a beautiful thing you did. Thank you for making this bridge. And of course, the one who was upset realized his own mistake, that this is what really should have been built a long, long time ago. Not a wall, but a bridge. And they hugged, and they made up, and they went back to being brothers. The carpenter, of course, was very happy. He realized that this is, of course, what should have been done all along, and he understood that this is very much needed. he's about to leave, and the brother who hired him says, "Oh, stay around, I have some more work for you." And he tells him, "I'm sorry, I'd love to, but I have more bridges to build." That's the fact of life, that there's a lot of bridges that need to be built, and that is why the rabbis tell us, always emphasize to everybody you know, to everyone who you have influence over them, always be ohev shalom verodef shalom. This means so much. Love peace and pursue peace. Do whatever it takes, not to build walls, but to be bridges. Bridges amongst people, bridges amongst brothers and sisters, and of course, the ultimate bridge, the bridge between us and Hashem. Amen.